The Forbidden Encounter. The twin moons of Eltharion cast a soft silver glow over the forest. The air was alive with faint whispers of leaves brushing against each other and the hum of distant creatures. Hidden in the shadows of the ancient trees, Lyra crouched, her silver skin shimmering faintly. Her wide violet eyes followed the movements of a human man, completely unaware of her presence. Jack moved with purpose, crouching near a patch of alien flowers. His fingers brushed over the petals as he murmured into a recording device. Fascinating structure. Completely unlike Earth's plants, he said, his voice steady but filled with curiosity. Lyra's heart thudded against her ribcage. She had heard about humans, of course. Every Celestian had. They were dangerous, emotional creatures. Her kind avoided them at all costs, forbidden by the Council's strict laws to interact with them. Yet here she was, captivated by this human's presence. She knew she shouldn't be here. Celestians were logical beings, valuing order and discipline above all else. Emotions, they believed, led to chaos. And humans, they embodied chaos. Her elders had drilled it into her since she was a child. Stay away from humans. They will destroy everything they touch. But despite the warnings, Lyra couldn't pull herself away. Jack stood and stretched, his tall figure silhouetted against the glowing moons. He looked around as if sensing something, and Lyra froze. She held her breath, her heart racing, as she pressed herself tighter against the bark of a tree. Had he noticed her? His eyes scanned the forest, but after a moment, he shrugged and turned back to his work. Lyra exhaled softly, relief washing over her. She told herself she would leave. One last glance, she thought. Just one more moment. Jack's voice broke the silence again. "I wish they could see this," he muttered, glancing at the device in his hand. Back home, they'd never believe plants like this exist. Home. The word stirred something unfamiliar in Lyra's chest. She wondered what it was like, his home. Did he miss it? Did he have a family waiting for him? Her curiosity was dangerous, she knew, but it was also irresistible. Before she could stop herself, she stepped out of the shadows. The movement was subtle, just enough for a single moonbeam to catch her figure. Jack froze. His gaze snapped toward her, his eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, neither of them moved. The world seemed to hold its breath, the only sound the soft rustle of the wind. Lyra knew she should run. She had broken the most sacred rule of her kind. But she didn't. Instead, she stood still, her violet eyes meeting his. Jack didn't move closer. He seemed to sense her fear. Instead, he raised his hands slowly, palms up, as if showing he meant no harm. "Hello," he said softly, his voice calm and steady. Lyra's heart raced. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She was torn between the urge to flee and the strange pull keeping her rooted in place. Jack tilted his head slightly, his expression curious but kind. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." His words were simple, but they carried a warmth Lyra wasn't used to. Celestians spoke with precision, their words cold and efficient. This human's voice was different. Finally, she found her voice. "You should not be here," she said, her words careful, her accent soft and melodic. Jack's eyes widened slightly, not with fear, but with wonder. "You speak my language." Lyra hesitated. She shouldn't have spoken. Every second she stayed was a risk, but something about his gaze made her linger. "Leave," she said firmly, though her voice wavered. "It is not safe." Jack nodded slowly. "I understand. But why? Why is it dangerous?" Lyra didn't answer. She couldn't. If she explained, she'd reveal too much. Instead, she stepped back into the shadows, her glowing skin fading into the darkness. "Wait," Jack called, taking a small step forward. "Please, I just want to understand." But Lyra was already gone, disappearing into the dense forest. Jack stared after her, his mind racing with questions. Who was she? Why was she so afraid? And why did her presence stir something deep inside him? something he couldn't quite name. As he turned back to his work, Jack couldn't shake the image of her glowing eyes, so full of fear and something else, something he couldn't describe. He didn't know it yet, but that brief encounter had changed everything. Lyra ran through the forest, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She had broken the law. She had spoken to a human. And worse, she knew she wanted to see him again. Far above them, a small surveillance drone hovered silently, its lens focused on the spot where they had stood. It zoomed in on Jack, then on the faint trail of light Lyra had left behind. A soft beep signaled its transmission to the Celestian Council. The forest fell silent once more, but the seeds of chaos had been sown. A dangerous connection. The nights on Eltharion were long and quiet, but Lyra's mind was anything but still. She sat on the smooth stone ledge of a cliff overlooking the glowing forest below, her violet eyes fixed on the horizon. The memory of Jack's steady gaze haunted her. His presence was different from the stories she'd been told. Humans were supposed to be reckless, destructive creatures. Yet Jack seemed calm, kind, even. She shook her head, frustrated at her own thoughts. It didn't matter what he was like. She had broken the law by speaking to him. If the council found out, the consequences would be severe. But despite the danger, her curiosity burned. She thought about the way his voice carried warmth, his movements careful and respectful toward her world. It was unlike anything she had seen from her own kind, who spoke with cold efficiency and viewed the world through logic. I must forget him, she whispered to herself, though her words felt hollow. Meanwhile, Jack stood outside his small research station, staring at the forest where he'd seen her disappear. The Celestians were supposed to be elusive, avoiding all contact with humans. His colleagues back on Earth believed they were emotionless beings, more advanced than humans, but uninterested in anything outside their logical pursuits. Yet the girl he'd seen, her wide, expressive eyes, the tremble in her voice, challenged everything he thought he knew. "Who are you?" Jack murmured, his fingers brushing the pendant he wore, a small keepsake from his sister back on Earth. He didn't believe in fate, but meeting her felt important. As he turned to go back inside, a faint sound caught his attention. A soft rustling of leaves, so quiet it could have been the wind. But Jack knew better. "Are you there?" he called gently, not wanting to frighten her. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows, her silver skin shimmering faintly in the moonlight. Lyra stood a few paces away, her hands clasped in front of her. Her posture was stiff, as though she were ready to flee at any moment. "I should not be here," she said, her voice low but firm. "And yet here you are," Jack replied, his tone light but careful. He stepped back, giving her space. "Why did you come back?" Lyra hesitated. She didn't fully understand why herself. Perhaps it was curiosity, or maybe the memory of his kindness. "You are different," she admitted cautiously. Jack smiled faintly. "I could say the same about you." She frowned, unsure if he was mocking her, but his expression was genuine. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone guarded. "I don't want anything," Jack said. "I just want to understand. Your people are incredible, but you've kept yourselves hidden. Why?" Lyra's lips pressed into a thin line. "We do not interfere with your kind, and you do not interfere with ours. And yet you're here," Jack pointed out. Her chest tightened at his words. He wasn't wrong, but that didn't make her actions any less dangerous. "This is a mistake," she said, stepping back. "Wait," Jack said quickly, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "Please, I don't mean to offend you. I just—" He paused, searching for the right words. "You seem curious, like me." Lyra blinked, startled by his insight. "Curiosity is dangerous," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "Sometimes," Jack agreed, "but it's also what makes us grow. Learn. Isn't that worth the risk?" Lyra studied him, her mind racing. His words stirred something inside her, a feeling she couldn't quite name. She wanted to leave, to retreat back to the safety of her village, but her feet refused to move. "You should go," she said finally, her voice trembling. "If they find us." "They?" Jack interrupted, his brow furrowing. Lyra froze. She had said too much. "Goodbye, human," she said, turning to leave. "Wait," Jack called after her. "What's your name?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second before disappearing into the forest, leaving his question unanswered. Far away, in the towering spires of the Celestian capital, a holographic screen displayed the scene between Lyra and Jack. Elder Kale, a tall figure with a cold, calculating gaze, watched the footage in silence. Beside him, a younger Celestian spoke hesitantly. "She broke protocol," the young one said. "Shall we bring her in for questioning?" Kale raised a hand, silencing him. "Not yet," he said. "Let us see how far she's willing to go." The younger Celestian nodded, though his expression betrayed unease. "And the human?" Cal's eyes narrowed. "He's irrelevant. She is our concern. For now." The screen flickered off, leaving the room in silence. Lyra returned to her village, her heart heavy with conflict. She had risked everything to speak to Jack again. And for what? Her people valued discipline and obedience above all else. She knew what would happen if the council found out. But despite the fear, she couldn't deny the truth. She wanted to see him again. As she lay in her small, minimalist room that night, staring up at the glowing symbols etched into the ceiling, a small device near her door buzzed softly. She reached for it, her breath catching as she read the message displayed on the screen. "They know. Stop now, or face the consequences." Her blood ran cold. The council was watching. Unbeknownst to her, Jack sat in his station, staring at the forest and wondering if he'd see her again. What he didn't realize was that he, too, was being watched. Hidden among the trees, a small drone hovered silently, its lens focused on him. The forest around them seemed calm, but danger was closing in from all sides. Love in the shadows, the forest seemed quieter than usual, as though it, too, sensed the tension. Lyra walked carefully, her steps barely making a sound on the soft ground. Her violet eyes darted around, scanning for movement. The council's warning haunted her, yet she couldn't stop herself from returning. Something about the human pulled her back, despite the danger. When she reached the clearing, Jack was already there. Sitting cross-legged by a small fire, he had carefully shielded to avoid drawing attention. His head turned quickly as she approached, but when he recognized her, his face softened. "I wasn't sure you'd come back," he said, standing slowly. "I shouldn't be here," Lyra replied, her voice sharper than she intended. Her words were true, but her feet betrayed her, moving closer to him instead of retreating. Jack tilted his head, studying her. "Then why are you?" Lyra hesitated. How could she explain the strange pull she felt toward him? How could she admit that his presence was a break in the cold, logical routine of her life, a spark of warmth in her otherwise calculated existence? "You ask too many questions," she said finally, avoiding his gaze. Jack chuckled softly. "I'm a scientist. It's kind of my job." He gestured to a small satchel beside him. "I brought something I thought you might like to see." Lyra frowned, curiosity flickering in her eyes despite herself. "What is it?" Jack crouched and carefully pulled out a thin metallic object. As he unfolded it, Lyra saw it was a screen. He tapped it, and a series of images appeared. "This is Earth," he said, his voice tinged with a softness that caught her off guard. Lyra leaned in, her breath catching as she saw pictures of vast oceans, towering mountains, and cities that sparkled with lights. The images were vibrant, alive, so different from the cool, calculated beauty of Eltharion. "It's chaotic," she said, her tone neutral but her eyes wide with wonder. Jack laughed. "Yeah, it is. But it's also home. Everything's unpredictable, always changing. That's what makes it beautiful." Lyra's gaze lingered on a picture of a bustling market, filled with humans laughing, shouting, and trading. The emotions on their faces were so open, so raw. "Your people feel everything so strongly," she said. "That's what we do," Jack admitted. "Sometimes it gets us into trouble, but it's also what makes us human." Lyra looked away, her mind spinning. Her people had spent centuries avoiding humans, labeling them as chaotic and dangerous. Yet here he was, offering her a glimpse into a world so different from her own. A world that felt alive. "You shouldn't show me this," she said finally. "It's forbidden." Jack's smile faded slightly, but he nodded. "I know, but I wanted you to see it, to understand." "Understand what?" "That we're not so different," he said quietly. Lyra's chest tightened at his words. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but deep down, she wasn't so sure. Far above the forest, the council convened in a chamber of shimmering light and cold steel. Elder Kale stood at the center, his gaze fixed on the holographic screen displaying Lyra and Jack's interaction. "She defies us," one of the younger council members said, his voice laced with anger. "This cannot continue." Kale raised a hand, silencing him. "Patience," he said. "We must see where this leads." Another council member, an older woman with sharp features, frowned. "You risk destabilizing our society, Kale. If she continues." "She won't," Kale interrupted, his tone icy. "She is young, impulsive. She will falter." "And the human?" the younger member asked. Kale's eyes narrowed. "A distraction. Nothing more. But if he pushes her further." He trailed off, his expression dark. Back in the forest, Jack and Lyra sat in silence for a moment. The fire crackled softly, the only sound between them. "What happens if they find out?" Jack asked finally, his voice low. "They already know," Lyra admitted, her shoulders stiffening. Jack's eyes widened. "What? Then why are you here? Aren't you afraid?" Lyra met his gaze, her own eyes filled with a mix of fear and defiance. "Of course I'm afraid. But—" She paused, struggling to find the words. "There's something about you, about this. It feels different. Important." Jack's heart raced at her words. He had always believed in the value of discovery, of pushing boundaries. But this was something else entirely. This wasn't just about science. It was about connection. "I won't let anything happen to you," he said firmly. Lyra blinked, surprised by the intensity in his voice. "You cannot protect me, human. My people are watching. If I continue to meet you, then we'll figure it out together," Jack said, his tone unwavering. Lyra looked at him, her fear battling with the strange warmth growing in her chest. She knew this couldn't last. Her people would come for her. For him. But for now, she let herself believe his words. High above them, the surveillance drone hovered, its lens fixed on their figures. In the cold chambers of the council, Kale watched, his expression unreadable. "She is already lost to us," one of the council members said. "No," Kale replied, his voice calm but firm. "Not yet, but if she takes one more step." His fingers hovered over a control panel. "We'll remind her where her loyalties lie." Hunted by her own kind. The forest was alive with faint whispers, trees swaying in the wind and nocturnal creatures stirring in the underbrush. But tonight, Lyra's sharp ears picked up something far more ominous, the faint hum of Celestian patrol drones slicing through the air. Her chest tightened as she glanced over her shoulder, her silver skin blending seamlessly with the moonlit surroundings. She knew they were looking for her. The council had grown impatient, and their enforcers were closing in. This was a mistake, she muttered to herself, her mind racing. She hadn't intended to meet Jack tonight. It was too dangerous. But the thought of leaving him unprepared for what was coming terrified her more than the council's wrath. She moved quickly but silently, her feet barely making a sound on the soft forest floor. Ahead, she saw the faint glow of Jack's campfire, hidden behind a makeshift barrier of branches and stones. When she reached the edge of the clearing, She didn't bother with formalities. "You have to leave. Now," she said, her voice urgent. Jack looked up from where he was tinkering with a small device, his brow furrowing at the sight of her. "Lyra, what's going on?" "They're coming for us," she said, stepping closer. Her eyes darted around the clearing, scanning for any sign of movement. "The council sent patrols. If they find you, they'll kill you." Jack's face hardened, but there was no fear in his eyes, only determination. "Then we'll leave. Together." Lyra shook her head. "You don't understand. They won't just stop with you. If they capture me, they'll—" She stopped herself, her voice breaking. She didn't want to think about what the council would do to her if she were caught. "Then we won't let them catch us," Jack said firmly. "You're reckless," she snapped, frustration bubbling to the surface. "This isn't your world, your fight. Why are you so willing to risk everything?" Jack stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "Because you're worth it." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. Lyra's breath caught, her usual sharp wit faltering in the face of his sincerity. Before she could respond, a sharp mechanical whir filled the air. Both of them froze, their eyes snapping to the sky. A patrol drone hovered just beyond the clearing, its scanning lights sweeping through the trees. "They found us," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. "Run," Jack said, grabbing her hand without hesitation. The forest was a blur of shadows and light as they ran, the drone's hum growing louder behind them. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing as she calculated their chances of escape. "We can't outrun them," she said, her voice tight with panic. "We don't have to," Jack replied, a hint of a plan in his voice. He veered sharply to the left, pulling her along with him. Lyra stumbled but kept pace, trusting him despite herself. They burst through a dense thicket and into a narrow ravine, the sound of rushing water filling her ears. Jack pointed to a hollow beneath a cluster of rocks. "Hide there," he said. "What about you?" she demanded, her fear sharpening her tone. "I'll distract them," Jack said, his eyes blazing with determination. "No." Lyra grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "You don't stand a chance against them." "I'll be fine," he said, his voice softer now. "Trust me." Lyra hesitated, torn between logic and the strange, powerful connection she felt to this human. Before she could argue further, Jack gently pulled her toward the hiding spot. "Stay here," he said. "I'll come back for you." Lyra watched as he disappeared into the shadows, her heart aching in a way she didn't fully understand. Jack didn't get far before the drone found him, its lights fixed on him, and a voice crackled through a speaker. "Human, you are in violation of Celestian law. Surrender immediately." Jack raised his hands, his expression calm despite the fear coursing through him. "I'm unarmed," he said. "I'm just a researcher." The drone hovered closer, scanning him with a bright, pulsing light. "Unauthorized contact with Celestians is a capital offense," the voice declared. Jack smirked, his fingers brushing against the small device in his pocket. "Funny. I don't remember signing up for your laws." Before the drone could respond, Jack pulled the device free and pressed a button. A high-pitched frequency erupted from the device, causing the drone to shudder violently. Sparks flew as its systems overloaded, and it crashed to the ground in a heap of twisted metal. Jack didn't wait to see if it would recover. He turned and sprinted back toward the ravine, his only thought on getting Lyra to safety. Lyra heard the explosion and scrambled out of her hiding place, her heart racing with dread. She spotted Jack emerging from the trees, his face streaked with dirt, but otherwise unharmed. "You're alive," she said, relief flooding her voice despite herself. "Did you doubt me?" Jack teased, though his smile was brief. Their moment of respite was short-lived. The sound of more drones filled the air, accompanied by the unmistakable whine of Celestian enforcer ships. "We need to move," Lyra said, her voice steady now. "I know a place where they won't find us." Jack nodded, following her without hesitation. As they disappeared into the forest, Elder Kale watched the scene unfold through a live feed in the council chamber. His expression was grim, his sharp features illuminated by the glowing screen. "She's leading him to the Forbidden Zone," one of the younger council members said, his voice laced with panic. "If they uncover what lies there." "They won't," Kale interrupted coldly. "Send the enforcers. Capture her alive." As for the human, he paused, his lips curling into a faint, humorless smile. "Make sure he doesn't leave this planet alive." The price of love. The dense forest opened up into a hidden canyon, its walls towering high above them like a natural fortress. A faint, luminescent mist hung in the air, giving the place an otherworldly glow. Jack stumbled to a halt, his breathing ragged from the relentless pace. Lyra, though tired, moved with purpose, her violet eyes scanning the area for signs of pursuit. "This way," she said, her voice low but urgent. She led him toward a narrow crevice in the canyon wall, almost invisible beneath the overgrowth. Jack hesitated. "Are you sure we'll be safe here?" "No," Lyra admitted, her tone clipped. "But it's the only place left." The crevice led to a cavern hidden deep within the rock. Inside, Jack's eyes adjusted to the dim light, revealing walls covered in strange carvings. The symbols glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. "What is this place?" he asked, running his fingers over the smooth etchings. Lyra didn't answer immediately. Her gaze was fixed on the largest carving, a spiral pattern surrounded by figures of Celestians and humans standing side by side. "This is what they fear," she said finally. Jack turned to her, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "This is the truth they've tried to erase," she explained, her voice heavy with emotion. "A long time ago, our species weren't enemies. We worked together, lived together. Some even loved each other." Her last words came out as barely a whisper. Jack's heart ached at the sadness in her voice. "What happened?" Lyra's fingers brushed against the spiral carving. "The council decided emotions made us weak. They claimed that human influence would destroy our society, so they severed all ties. Those who resisted were erased." She looked at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "And now, anyone who dares to break their laws faces the same fate." Outside the cavern, the hum of enforcer ships grew louder, their searchlights slicing through the mist. The Celestians were closing in. Lyra sat down on a smooth stone, her energy drained. "You should leave," she said, avoiding Jack's gaze. Jack crouched in front of her, his expression resolute. "I'm not going anywhere without you." "You don't understand," she said, her voice cracking. "If they catch me, they'll make an example of me. But you, they'll kill you outright. I won't let that happen." "Then we fight," Jack said simply. Lyra shook her head, her frustration boiling over. "You're so stubborn. You think you can save me, but you can't. You're just one man against an entire council." Jack smiled faintly. "Maybe I can't save you, but I won't abandon you either." Before Lyra could respond, a sharp noise echoed through the cavern. They both froze, their eyes snapping to the entrance. "They've found us," Lyra whispered. The enforcers entered with precision, their sleek armor reflecting the faint glow of the carvings. Their leader, a tall Celestian with cold, calculating eyes, stepped forward. "Lyra," he said, his voice like ice. "Surrender now, and the council may show mercy." Jack stepped in front of her, shielding her with his body. "You'll have to go through me first," he said defiantly. The enforcer leader's gaze flicked to Jack, his expression unimpressed. "Human, your courage is misplaced. You cannot stop us." Lyra's voice rang out, sharp and clear. "Stop this. He's done nothing wrong." "You have betrayed your kind," the enforcer leader said, his tone unyielding. "The human is irrelevant. It is your actions that have condemned you." Lyra's fists clenched. "Condemn me for what? Feeling? Caring? Is that what you call betrayal?" The enforcer leader's expression darkened. You have one chance to come willingly. Do not make this worse. Jack glanced at Lyra, his mind racing. He reached into his satchel and pulled out the small device he had used to disable the drone earlier. Whispering to her, he said, "When I give the signal, run." "No," she whispered back. "I won't leave you." "Please," Jack said, his voice breaking. "This is bigger than me. You have to survive. For both of us." Lyra's eyes glistened with tears, but she nodded reluctantly. Jack activated the device, sending out a deafening pulse that temporarily disoriented the enforcers. He lunged forward, grabbing a fallen weapon from one of the guards. His movements were quick, but he was no match for the Celestians' advanced technology. "Run," he shouted, firing a burst of light at the enforcers to cover her escape. Lyra hesitated for a split second, her heart tearing in two. Then she turned and bolted deeper into the cavern, the carvings flashing past her as she ran. Outside, Lyra emerged into a hidden valley bathed in the light of the twin moons. She stumbled to a stop, her chest heaving with sobs. She wanted to turn back, to fight, but she knew Jack had sacrificed himself to give her a chance. Behind her, the sound of energy blasts echoed through the cavern. Her knees buckled as she fell to the ground, clutching her chest. She had always been taught to suppress her emotions, but now they overwhelmed her like a tidal wave. "I'll come back for you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I promise." Far above, the council watched the live feed in silence. Elder Kell's expression was unreadable as he leaned back in his chair. "She escaped," one of the younger council members said, his voice tinged with frustration. Kell's gaze remained fixed on the screen. "Let her run. She'll return. They always do." His cold smile widened. "And when she does, we'll have what we need to end this rebellion before it begins. A fight for freedom." The hidden valley was vast and eerily quiet, the soft glow of bioluminescent plants casting long shadows over the landscape. Lyra stood alone, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. Somewhere behind her, Jack was still fighting. She couldn't bear the thought of leaving him to face the enforcers alone. But she knew the truth. If she turned back now, they would both be captured or worse. She had to keep moving, find a way to fight back, and save him. Her gaze fell on an ancient structure half buried in the earth ahead. Vines and moss covered its surface, but its sharp geometric edges hinted at its purpose. It was an old Celestian outpost, abandoned long before her time. Lyra approached cautiously, her fingers brushing over the symbols etched into the stone. These ruins were forbidden, spoken of only in hushed whispers. They were remnants of the time before the Council had seized control, back when Celestians and humans had worked together. "Maybe there's something here," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Inside the ruins, the air was thick with the smell of damp earth and old metal. The walls were lined with dormant consoles, their surfaces covered in dust. Lyra's hands trembled as she activated one of the panels, the ancient machinery humming faintly to life. A holographic interface flickered into view, its alien symbols dancing in the air. Lyra hesitated, her fingers hovering over the controls. She didn't fully understand the technology, but she knew enough from her studies to navigate it. As she worked, a recorded voice filled the room, its tone warm but tinged with sadness. "Welcome, Seeker. If you found this place, then you're searching for the truth. Our alliance with humanity was not our weakness. It was our strength. Together, we thrived. But fear and greed tore us apart." Lyra's breath hitched. The words felt like a direct challenge to the Council's teachings. The recording continued. "This station contains the last of our shared technology. Use it wisely. Together, we are stronger than apart." The console lit up, revealing a schematic of a ship buried beneath the ruins. It was an old hybrid vessel, designed by both humans and Celestians, a ship built for two. Meanwhile, back in the cavern, Jack was fighting for his life. The enforcers had regrouped, their sleek armor glinting in the dim light. Jack ducked behind a rock as an energy blast scorched the ground where he'd been standing moments before. "Give it up, human," the enforcer leader shouted. "You're outnumbered and outmatched." Jack gritted his teeth, clutching the stolen weapon tightly. "Yeah, well, I've always been a fan of underdogs." He fired blindly, buying himself a few more precious seconds, but he knew he couldn't hold them off forever. His thoughts drifted to Lyra, hoping she had found safety. Suddenly, a voice crackled through the enforcer's comms. "Hold your fire. Return to base." The enforcer leader hesitated, his gaze narrowing. "What are your orders, Elder Cal?" Cal's voice was cold and commanding. "Let him live. We have what we need. Return to the capital." The enforcers reluctantly retreated, their weapons lowering. Jack watched in confusion as they vanished into the shadows, leaving him battered but alive. Back at the ruins, Lyra had uncovered the entrance to the buried ship. Her heart raced as she stepped inside, the dim lights of the interior flickering on as the vessel came to life. The ship's design was unlike anything she'd seen before. The control panels glowed with both Celestian and human markings, a testament to the unity they had once shared. Lyra ran her fingers over the controls, her mind spinning with possibilities. This ship could be their salvation. It was fast, armed, and equipped to leave the planet undetected. But activating it wouldn't be easy. Hours later, Jack stumbled into the ruins, his clothes torn and his face smudged with dirt. Relief washed over him as he spotted Lyra inside the ship, working furiously at the controls. "Lyra," he called, his voice hoarse. She turned, her eyes widening at the sight of him. "You're alive." Jack grinned weakly. "You sound surprised." Lyra rushed to him, her hands brushing over his injuries. "I thought they'd." "They let me go," Jack said, his tone serious. "But something's not right. They didn't seem finished." Lyra frowned, her mind racing. "The Council never gives up so easily. They're planning something." Jack glanced at the ship around them, his expression turning hopeful. "What is this?" "It's our way out," Lyra said. "If I can get it running, we can escape. Leave Eltharion. Start over." Jack's smile faltered. "And go where?" "The Council won't stop hunting you. They'll track us across the galaxy." Lyra hesitated, knowing he was right. But then her gaze hardened. "If they want to stop us, they'll have to catch us first." As they worked together to prepare the ship, Cale watched from the council chamber. His expression was unreadable as the live feed displayed the scene inside the ruins. "She's found it," one of the younger council members said, their tone laced with worry. "Good," Cale replied, a faint smile curling his lips. "Good," another member echoed, confused. Cale leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Let them leave. They'll lead us to the remnants of the rebellion. Once they've exposed themselves, we'll strike. This time, there will be no escape." The council chamber fell silent, the weight of Cal's plan settling over them like a storm. Back in the ruins, the ship roared to life, its engines shaking the ground. Lyra and Jack exchanged a determined look as they strapped in, ready to face whatever came next. But neither of them realized the true cost of their defiance, or the trap waiting for them in the stars. A new beginning. The ship burst from the surface of Eltharion in a fiery blaze, its ancient engines roaring against the planet's gravity. Lyra and Jack sat side by side in the cockpit, the glow of the controls casting soft light on their tense faces. For a moment, as the ship broke through the thick clouds, the stars stretched out before them, infinite and breathtaking. "We did it," Jack whispered, his voice tinged with awe. Lyra didn't respond. Her gaze was locked on the navigation console, her fingers dancing over the controls. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, hope for their escape, fear of the Council's pursuit, and an unshakable determination to protect what they had found. "We're not safe yet," she said finally, her voice steady but low. Jack nodded. "So, where are we going?" Lyra hesitated, glancing at a star chart that flickered to life on the screen. "There's a place," she said, pointing to a remote system far beyond the Council's reach. "A forgotten colony. If the records are true, humans and Celestians once lived there in peace. It might be our only chance." Far below, in the heart of the Celestian capital, Elder Kale stood in the council chamber, his eyes fixed on a holographic projection of the ship as it streaked into the atmosphere. "Are they tracking us?" a young council member asked, their voice laced with concern. Kale smirked, his calm demeanor chilling. "Of course. Let them run. They believe they've escaped, but they're leading us directly to what we've been searching for." "What if they succeed in finding the colony?" another member asked, their tone urgent. "They won't," Kale replied sharply. "And if they do, they'll only seal its fate." In the ship, Jack watched as Lyra skillfully guided them through a treacherous asteroid belt, her focus unshakable. "You're good at this," he said, a note of admiration in his voice. Lyra allowed herself a small smile. "I studied piloting when I was younger. I always dreamed of leaving Eltharion. I just didn't think it would happen like this." Jack leaned back in his seat, his expression thoughtful. "Why do you think they hate humans so much? It can't just be about emotions." Lyra sighed, her gaze distant. "It's more than that. Emotions make us unpredictable, and unpredictability is dangerous to a society built on control." She paused, her voice softening. "But I think they fear what they don't understand, what they can't control." Jack nodded, understanding her words on a level that surprised even himself. As they neared the coordinates of the forgotten colony, the ship's sensors lit up with activity. A massive energy field surrounded the planet, shimmering like a protective shield. "That's it," Lyra said, her voice tinged with both relief and disbelief. "It's real." Jack stared at the planet below, its surface dotted with green oceans and silver cities, a stark contrast to the cold, metallic spires of Eltharion. "It looks alive," he said softly. Lyra smiled faintly. "It's a symbol of what we could have been, what we could still be." But before they could descend, the ship's warning system blared. A fleet of Celestian enforcer ships emerged from hyperspace, their sleek designs gleaming menacingly against the black void. "They found us," Jack said, his voice tight. Lyra's hands flew over the controls, her mind racing. "They must have placed a tracker on the ship. I should have known." The enforcer ships closed in quickly, their weapons locking onto the ancient vessel. Lyra's ship, though advanced for its time, was no match for the Council's modern fleet. A voice crackled through their comms. It was Kale. "You've led us well, Lyra," he said, his tone calm and mocking. "We owe you our thanks for delivering the last remnants of rebellion into our hands. Surrender now, and I might show mercy." Lyra's jaw tightened. "Your mercy is a lie." Cal's laughter echoed through the comms. "So be it." The enforcer ships opened fire, bright streaks of energy lighting up the void. Lyra threw the ship into a series of evasive maneuvers, but the odds were stacked against them. Just when it seemed they were out of options, a voice crackled through the ship's comms, an unfamiliar voice, firm and defiant. "This is the Colony Defense Force. Stand down, Celestian fleet, or face immediate retaliation." Lyra and Jack exchanged stunned looks as massive ships emerged from the planet's energy field, their designs unlike anything either of them had seen. They were sleek and powerful, bearing the unmistakable marks of both human and Celestian craftsmanship. The colony ships opened fire on the enforcers, their weapons precise and devastating. The Celestian fleet faltered, caught off guard by the colony's unexpected strength. Kel's voice returned, now laced with anger. "This isn't over, Lyra. You've only delayed the inevitable." As the enforcer fleet retreated, Lyra's ship was guided through the energy field and onto the surface of the colony planet. On the ground, Lyra and Jack were met by a group of humans and Celestians standing together, their expressions a mix of curiosity and cautious hope. A tall Celestian with a warm but commanding presence stepped forward. "You've brought trouble with you," he said, his voice steady. Lyra nodded. "We had no choice. But we also brought something else, a chance to rebuild what was lost." The Celestian leader studied her for a moment before nodding. "Then you're welcome here." As Lyra and Jack looked out over the thriving colony, a place where humans and Celestians lived and worked together in harmony, they felt a sense of hope they hadn't known in a long time. "We're not safe yet," Jack said, his hand brushing hers. "No," Lyra agreed, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "But we're not alone anymore." High above, in the depths of space, Cal's fleet regrouped, his eyes burning with cold fury. "They think they've won," he said to his officers. "But they've only lit the spark of a war that they cannot win." As the stars shifted around him, the fight for freedom had only just begun.